Good afternoon, good evening to everybody. A warm welcome to this side session on the ubiquity of informal employment in the garment supply chains. We are happy that so many people are joining us. My name is Karin Pape and I'm working with the Organization and Representation Program in WIEGO. I will be facilitating the side session. But first, I'd like to give Laura Rivello the opportunity to explain to us some housekeeping issues. Laura Rivello is the Communication and Media Officer of HomeNet International. So Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Sarbani, could we move on to the next slide? So for this side session, we have several languages for interpretation. We have Spanish, Hindi, Thai, Swahili, and Russian. The main language will be English, which is the floor language. So to choose your language, please make sure to go to the bottom of your screen and look for the interpretation icon, which is this globe. You can click on that globe and it will be displayed the 5 different languages there, and then you can just go ahead and choose that one. If you're on your mobile phone, you go to the 3 dots at the bottom of the screen on your Zoom app on your phone, and you can go ahead and also choose the 5 different languages. Throughout the session, if you have any technical issues, please put it in the chat, and the HNI team will try to troubleshoot and will message you directly and see if we can solve the issue. Additionally, this is a meeting format, so pretty much anyone can unmute or mute themselves, but we please suggest that everyone mute their mics unless they will be called upon during the Q&A session. If you have any questions or comments, you can go ahead and put those in the chat. This meeting is also recorded, so we will be able to provide the link to the recording after it is over. Over to you, Karen. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That I hope was very helpful for everybody, that you can find your interpretation channel. To give you a bit of a flavor what our session will be about, we will be starting off by showing you a little video produced by HomeNet South Asia on home workers in global supply chains. And welcome Sabini, who will be running the video and the slides afterwards. Please, Sabini, can you start the video?
Fast fashion rules the global garment industry, rapidly churning out low-cost trends. This has given birth to global supply chains that crisscross continents and nations, involving many people at different stages of production. At the very top of this chain sits the retailer or brand that designs products, brands, and markets them. A regional sourcing office for the brand then contracts suppliers, coordinates on designs and costing, and assures compliance. Suppliers or manufacturers can be big export houses and factories. They take charge of all aspects of manufacturing. Brands can hire many manufacturers in many countries, and suppliers can produce for more than one brand. To keep up with demand and timelines, large manufacturers subcontract work. This is usually where the lines blur on compliance. Contractors and subcontractors take on excess work, fulfilling orders in small production units or through home workers. At the bottom of the supply chain are home workers who get work through a contractor or a series of contractors and are often unaware of the brand they are working for. They are provided with the raw material and are given work instructions and earn piece rates. Home workers take up various jobs. These can be skilled jobs like embroidery, weaving, or stitching, or low-end work like finishing, ironing, or packing. During peak season, home workers work long hours to fulfill orders on time in exchange for low piece rates. They take on significant costs and risks of production, including paying for electricity and equipment and foregoing payments when contractors reject pieces made. Poor working conditions result in health problems, and they also face violence and harassment at the hands of their contractors. Often, home workers do not receive adequate work through the year. They remain invisible and command little bargaining power. However, without home workers, the global garment industry would come to a standstill. Their skilled handwork adds sheen to the garments. And it is their value additions that make products marketable. Acknowledging these invisible workers will go a long way in making fashion ethical and for all.
Thank you so much for this video, which was a kind of a quick rush through the problems that you will be hearing more about. So don't worry if you didn't catch everything. So there is evidence that informality is prevalent throughout garment and footwear supply chains, and we will be learning more about that soon. But however, this session will focus on the invisible parts of garments and footwear supply chains, workers who work in workshops or in their homes. In India, for example, most of the workforce in the sector work in workshops or from their homes. We will be looking at recent research in 5 countries: Bangladesh, Cambodia, Indonesia, Pakistan, and India. We will further explore why factories subcontract to workshops and home workers. What are the working conditions of the workers, and what does formalization mean for them? Last but not least, we will discuss why it matters for policymakers to address informality in the garment and footwear supply chains, and how to build on existing rights and legislation. During the presentation, please write any questions or comments in the chat function, which will be then the basis for our Q&A session, and we will hope we will be able to manage that. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce to you our first panelist, Mike Rogan. Mike is a research associate professor in economics at Rhodes University in South Africa, and he's also working for WIEGO. Recently, he has been working closely with the ILO to look at the extent of informality in the garment and footwear supply chains in the 5 countries I just mentioned. Welcome, Mike. Mike, here is the question for you. What is the extent of informality in the 5 countries, and what is the contribution to employment? Mike, you have the floor, and you have 6 minutes maximum. I will check.
Thanks, Karen. And would it be possible to get our slides back up so people can see them? There we go. That's perfect. And I should just like to say thank you to the ILO, in particular, Dr. Sergey Suarez, who helped work with us to help us understand the answer to some of these questions about the prevalence of informality in the garments sector in these countries. I should say that these data come from a large international database called ILO Stat, and it takes national level labor force surveys from each country that participates. Most countries in the world provide these data, and allows us to answer sort of questions comparing situations in different countries. So it's really the most authoritative data sets on working conditions that's comparable across different countries. To answer the question properly, I think we first need to think about how much of total employment in these 5 countries is in the garment sector. And here you can see that there's quite a bit of variation across the countries. The largest share of employment that's in the garment sector is from the example of Cambodia. Just under 20% of total employment is found in the garment sector. But across the other countries, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Pakistan, and India, garment work is not an insignificant part of total employment. So it's a relatively large source of employment in all 5 countries. Next slide, please. If we turn now to the question of the prevalence of informality in the garment sector in these 5 countries, we first need to say something briefly about what we mean by informality. So in the statistics I'm going to be presenting, we're using the ILO, or International Conference of Labor Statisticians, international comparative framework for defining informal employment. And this largely consists of two things. These are workers that have neither legal protection nor social protection attached to their employment. So the way it works is that each country uses this broad framework and operationalizes it differently in their own context to provide a national definition of informality, which falls under this broader concept of no legal or social protection in their employment. Next slide, please. So here we can apply that broad definition of informal employment, or employment without legal or social protection, in the garment sector in each country. In order to look at this with a view to getting closer to understanding where garment workers work, we've divided the groups in each country to garment workers that are home-based, that are denoted by the orange bars, and garment workers that work outside of their homes. These are the blue bars. That blue bar is a very broad category. It includes work in factories, but also in many cases work in other places, offices, workshops of various sizes, and certainly isn't restricted to work in factories. So the percentage you can see for each bar is the percentage of each type of employment in each country, or in each sector within each country. So for example, if we look at Bangladesh, 100% of home-based garment work is classified as informal, compared with 96% of garment work outside of the home. So if you look across the 5 countries, you can see that informality is prevalent both within the home and garment work outside of the home in workshops, factories, and offices. There tends to be quite a big difference with home-based work, garment work in particular. More than 90% in all countries is informal, and varying levels, but still the majority of garment work outside of the home is also informal. And then we have an example like Bangladesh, where it doesn't seem to matter a great deal whether that employment is in the home or outside of the home. Almost all of garment work employment in Bangladesh is classified as informal. Thank you. And then my last slide concerns the gender of the workers in the garment chains in each of these countries. Again, the blue bars denote garment work that takes place outside of the home, and the orange bars denote garment work that takes place inside of the home of the worker. And the percent here you can see is the share of each category of worker that is female, that are women. And what you should be able to see across the 5 countries is that the orange bars are always higher than the blue bars, meaning the share of women in home-based work is particularly high. And 2 countries, Bangladesh and Pakistan, almost all home-based garment work is done by women, less so in some of the other contexts. But still, the vast majority of home-based work in the garment sector is informal and done by women. So I hope that gives a broad sense of the prevalence. There are high levels of informality, both with home-based work and work in the garment sector outside of homes. And women appear to be concentrated in those sectors that are more informal. I think we're now going to look more specifically at what working in the home and working in other places means. So I'll hand this back to you as chair, Karin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike, and also for your first kind of introduction that outside of the home can mean many things. I'm not sure if Sergey Suarez from the ILO is already with us, but if he's joining, I'm sure if wanted, he can shed some more light on that in the Q&A session. So, and I see that questions are coming in. This is fine. We will take due note of them. Don't worry. But we are continuing with our second panelist. This is Marlies van Brömsen. She is a lawyer and a senior labor rights researcher for WIEGO. She has supported affiliates of Homeland International to advocate for the inclusion of all workers in all tiers of the chain in the EU Directive on Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence. We are not having time enough to talk about that difficult question today. We are still on it. Welcome, Marlies. Marlies, the question for you, can you please explain the different kinds of informal employment in garment and footwear supply chains in terms of contractual arrangements and the place of work? And for this first time, you're on a second time, you have 4 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Sabani, if you can put up the slides. So I'm going to start where Mike left off and define informality, not from a statistical perspective, but from a legal perspective. Using the typology of Fenwick et al., you'll see on my left-hand side are the 4 characteristics of standard employment, and that is employment that is protected by labor law. So the characteristics are 1, that it's permanent, 2, full-time, that there's a direct supervision of the employee on the employer's premises, and that there is a direct contractual relationship between the employer and the employee. So you'll see on the right are the forms of non-standard employment. So this is what we see, the kind of informality that we see in garment and footwear supply chains. That's when any one of these 4 characteristics is shifted. So it is either temporary, and in factories we find it's temporary in 2 ways. The work is fixed-term contract work, so it's temporary in terms of time, or it's temporary in terms of it being casual, that you paid per job, per piece that you make. So they're piece rate workers. The second is part-time, then off the premises in the case of subcontracted out work, so home workers or people who work in workshops. And then finally, that you engage through an intermediary. So you're off, you don't have a direct relationship, a contractual relationship with the employer. So what's quite interesting is that you could be in a factory and you could be temporary and part-time, but you could also be at home and be permanent and full-time, but at home. So you see how the different characteristics of non-standard work can play out differently depending on, well, in different work sites. Next slide, please. So the slide that we're going to see now in the orange is the structure of a garment supply chain in Tirupur in India. So Tirupur is in Tamil Nadu. It's known as the factory of the world. The t-shirt factory of the world. Approximately 400 brands buy their t-shirts from Tirupur. And you'll notice there the first tier supplier and the second tier supplier are factories. So that's where we would find the fixed term contract work and piece rate work. And then they would subcontract to either to workshops, larger workshops between 10 and 80 people, who then subcontract to smaller workshops, and finally all the way down to home workers. Or home workers could be contracted directly by the factory, through contractors, as you see there. So now moving to the figures, which are for the whole of India. This draws on 2018 paper, which is looking at the number of workers employed in these different tiers of the chain. And I think what is remarkable there is that if you looked at the small workshops, so that's workshops that employ between 1 and 10 employees, 16.3 million workers are employed there, which is a third more than all the workers together in the tier 1 and tier 2 factories. So now I want to take you to the last slide, which is a picture of Tirupur, a beautiful street. And you'll see on the left-hand side, in every single one of those houses are home workers who are part of the supply chain. And in some of those buildings, it would be like a compound of 8 families, each living in one room, and that room is also a workplace. And little trucks come every morning and drop off the work for the day and come back in the evening and collect the work from all the home workers. So there you see a home worker on your right-hand side, and she's carrying her bundle of goods for today. You'll remember the little video. Some would be doing labor-intensive work, artisanal kind of work, like screen printing or embroidery. She's doing finishing work. Okay, thank you, Karen. Back to you.
Thank you, Marlies, for these inside views. The next speaker is Viakula Mary. I'm very happy to introduce you to her. She is the Executive Director of HomeNet South Asia, and she has been actively involved in working with informal workers, including home-based workers, for the last 30 years. Welcome, Viakula Mary. Can you please explain to us why factories subcontract to workshops and home workers, and why does it matter? And Mary, you have 6 minutes, and I'm checking. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Karin. I'm Viakula Mary, Executive Director of SAVE, which is an organization situated in Tirupur, South India, Tamil Nadu. We are working among the home-based workers for the past around 1.5. As you all are aware of, Tirupur is a textile garment hub for international market and as well for the domestic local market. So here, why the product, international product or domestic product, very largely coming to our home-based workers? So only one, the main purpose is cost cutting. If they want to do the product quality wise with the cheapest rate, it has to go to the home-based garment workers. It is one of the purchasing practice is being adopted by the brand and as well as the suppliers. So these home-based workers, how the cheapest is being calculated? One side, the goods is being produced without any the labor standards, particularly employment relationship, working hours, security, and then the working atmosphere, social security benefits. These are all no need to be done for the home-based workers. This is the way the cost cutting is being taken account to the supplier and as well as for the brands. If the brands is paid also, the supplier choosing this option in 2 ways. One is excessive production time. Automatically, this production is being spread across to the many home-based workers, and small workshop where 3 to 7 women can be together and do the work. So in such a way, it is crossing minimum 3 to 5 ages. So these are all the people also having their own margin and it is going away from there. Finally, those who are involved in this productivity are forbidden by the what they supposed to get, the wages, the excessive working hours they are involving in, and also they are completely denied of social security benefits. So leaving all the rights, the production is taking places in the factory and it is being supplied to the brands and elsewhere. So the purchasing practices has to be changed. How? It is not completely denying that goods should not go to the home-based workers. But the home-based workers also can be part of the inclusive strategy in where all the benefits, labor law benefits, labor rights benefits has to reach them. So that is a way, if you all do justification for the workers so that the workers also get benefited, the business also take places in equality manner. With this, I stop my talk. If there is any question raised, please ask. I will answer to you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mary, for your insight knowledge and mentioning that home workers should not be only included in purchasing practices, but also in terms of the rights of the workers along the chain. So I think that's one of the main important things for today. So the next speaker on the list is also a long-standing activist for home workers' rights. I'm happy to introduce to you Suntari Saingeng. I never produced her last name, so I hope I got that right. She is the Executive Director of HomeNet Southeast Asia. Welcome, Suntari. Suntari, your intervention will be of two parts. So the first is, please share with us your vast knowledge about the working conditions of home workers, but just in a couple of minutes, and explain to us, why do women workers want to work from home? So the floor is yours for this question. 4 minutes, please, Suntari.
Thank you so much, Karin. The way you pronounce my surname is excellent. First thing I would like to share with all of you why women work from home. The very big important reason is about gender division of labor, because in the Asia country, like in my Thailand and our neighbor country, women are often responsible for household and caregiving duties, to care for children, elderly family members, and also the housework, while men typically have income generating activities. So women need more time to spend at home. And women contribute to household income as men earning may not cover all expenses of families. And the retirement age of factory workers is one more reason. In Thailand, the retirement age is 55, but I hear from a list that in some countries, even 40s, which means that women over the retirement age must work from home to earn a living. And some of women in village, they can get work from constructor, and they don't have to travel into the city to work. At the same time, in some countries, some regions, traditions, they don't allow women to work outside of the house. This is the reason why women work at home. That is from me right now at this round. Up to you, Karin.
Thank you, Suntari. This is for sharing with us the structural reasons why many women work from home, but also why they are themselves interested in working from home. This makes really clear that problems of home workers will not be solved just by transferring them to factories, as many people think, but that it is important to improve the conditions of workers who work from home or in their workshops. So before we will continue to listen to Suntari about the Thai legislation to protect home workers, we will be sharing with you a video which is taking us to a home of a home worker and she will illustrate her working conditions. So, Sabani, can you please start the video?
สวัสดีค่ะดิฉันชื่อกิ่งประภาพรภัทรดลนะคะเย็บผ้าตั้งแต่อายุ14ตอนนี้ก็47ละตรงนี้ก็คือเป็นบริเวณของเย็บผ้าค่ะแล้วข้างในเราก็กั้นห้องสมมติ8ชั่วโมงอย่างเงี้ยเราก็ทำงาน8ชั่วโมงเช้าใช่ไหมคะเราก็เริ่มงานตั้งแต่7โมงถ้าเราขยันหน่อยก็6โมงบางวันก็ตี5แล้วเราก็เลิกงานประมาณสัก3ทุ่ม4ทุ่มประมาณนี้ค่ะเราก็อยู่ในเบรกของเราในแมทของเราเองถ้างานเร่งหน่อยก็5ทุ่มเป็นบางวันแต่มากหนูจะทำคนเดียวค่ะส่วนมากตอนใหญ่เลยนะถ้าตีเฉลี่ยอย่างอยู่คนเดียวอย่างเงี้ยคุณหาเงินไว้เลยจ่ายค่าห้องค่าอยู่ค่ากินของเราเนี่ย 7,000 บาทก็จะบีบให้ได้50ตัวค่ะต่อวันเพราะเรามีเป้าหมายไงถ้ามาทำอยู่ที่25ตัวเราไม่ได้กินอะไรค่าไฟเราก็ไม่คุ้มมันไม่คุ้มหลายๆอย่างบางทีปวดชิ้นฉงเดี๋ยวอีก2ตัวป่ะอีกตัวนึงป่ะเดี๋ยวเร่งก่อนแล้วเร่งก่อนอะไรเงี้ยบางทีมันก็ลืมไปเลยพอลืมไปว่ามันเริ่มใหม่แล้วพอเราไปปัสสาวะมันก็ทีละนิดมันเราไม่เราปวดท้องพอปวดท้องขึ้นมาปั๊บก็กระเพาะอักเสบต้องกินยาละแต่ทุกวันนี้พูดตรงๆนะมันเหมือนมันงานรับอย่างเงี้ยเขาจะบีบราคาเรามากที่สุดบางทีเขาก็บอกว่าโอ้คุณได้มาแค่นี้ผมได้แค่2 บาทเองผมให้คุณเท่านี้นะอะไรเงี้ยบางทีเอาวะช่วยกันสนิทกันก็ต้องช่วยกันอะไร
Thank you, Sabani, for the video. This also gives you a little bit of the flavor of the conditions that other speakers were speaking about earlier. And there is one good example to get more protection to these workers, and that is the Thai legislation. Now we want to hear from Suntari what it is and the challenges of implementation. So just to say that Suntari herself was involved in the 10-year struggle to achieve this milestone of protection for home workers in Thailand. But she also, of course, has some critical comments. So Suntari, the floor is yours for another 4 minutes, please.
You all see from the video already the situation and the exploitation that women home workers face during their work at home. So because of that, after studying C177, HomeNet Thailand, as the movement of home-based workers in Thailand, we collaborate with the political party and House of Representatives to start Home Worker Protection Act. In order to protect home workers from that kind of exploitation, especially unfair wages and hazardous work conditions. And the essence of the act is 2 things. First is about wage protection. According to that act, employer must pay home workers the same wage as factory workers. The second is about occupational safety and health protection. Employees have to provide personal protective equipment for all home workers and compensate for work-related sickness, injury, or death of home workers. Our Home Worker Protection Act in Thailand is implemented since 2010, but still a lot of challenge. Next slide, please. The challenge is the Ministry of Labor does not play an active role in implementation. They wait for home workers to file complaints. Even they know what happened in the field, without complaint from home workers, they don't deal with that case. The second is from home workers themselves. Even they know about their rights according to this act, but they're still afraid to negotiate their legal rights because they fear of losing their jobs. If you don't do this, the women in your neighbor village will do it. That is the thing that employer always told them. So the home workers, women, they don't they don't brave to negotiate. So even it's long years already, as HomeNet Thailand, we plan to do more things in the next. Like we plan to advocacy on ratification of C177, because we think that because of that, we can draw global attention to our government's implementation effort. The second is we would like to advocacy more on ratification of C87 and C98 to strengthen the negotiation power of home workers. And the last one, not only Home Worker Protection Act will enough, we have to develop the social security program for home workers and all workers in the informal economy. That is the thing that need to continue. That is all from my end right now. And if you have any question or clarification, I will come back to you at the end of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So to read, there are coming questions in, but we will keep them a little bit for later. Just to say that the other conventions that Sundari was mentioning is the two flagship, one of the two flagships, two of the flagship conventions of the ILO, the right of freedom of association to form trade unions, and the other one to collective bargaining. So, but thank you again so much for illustrating that having a good law is not the end, but just the beginning to ensure protection for home workers. So, yeah, and we will be hearing more about rights in a little bit later. Our next panelist is Janvi Dave, who is the International Coordinator of HomeNet International. She has over 15 years of experience in organizing and building membership-based organizations of informal workers and advocating for their rights, in particular of home-based workers. So welcome, Janvi. Janvi, we'd like to hear from you. Why does it matter for policymakers to take note of informal employment in garment and footwear supply chains? And what does this mean for supply chain legislation? You have 10 minutes, but we are a little bit over time already. So if you can save maybe 1 or 2, that would be great. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Karin, for that question. And I actually see a lot of HomeNet International affiliates here in this session who are attending as audience. And HomeNet International is a network of home-based worker organizations, 75 of them from 33 countries. And they would agree that they get this question a lot from policymakers at all levels. So it's not, at global level for HomeNet International, but also a lot of the same questions asked at national level too. And we generally have these 4 key reasons that we like to provide to policymakers that why should they be interested in the informal employment in garment and footwear supply chains. The first and foremost is because the large part of production for the garment and footwear sector is done by workers in the informal employment. We heard from Marlies earlier in this session itself about the case in India. So Sarbani, if we could go back to that slide, it would be very useful to explain. If you see here that the first 2 tiers have 12.9 million workers. And then in workshops, both small and big, as well as home workers, there are over 24 million workers. So the question here is that, when policy is made, it is made only for the first and second tier of the supply chain. But what about, say, the 24 million workers in this supply chain, right? So they are not covered by labor law, social protection, or any company code of conduct. And if the policymakers are serious about the issues of, say, human rights, child labor, then they should insist on making policies for all workers through the supply chains, both formal as well as in the informal employment. The second, that's it. Thanks, Sarbani, for that slide. A second and a related point is that social auditing, which most large companies do, also drives subcontracting. There's a very nice blog piece written by my colleague Marlies here, which mentions a study of 40 factories in 8 garment and footwear producing countries that found that it is a common practice for suppliers to maintain one factory that complies with codes while subcontracting to unaudited factories. Auditors themselves recognize this, and researchers' interviews with auditors reveal that these significant blind spots. They showed that because many exploited workers are technically employed by what you call labor providers and contractors or at offsite production facility, they're thus not officially on the books. And so auditors had little scope to detect or address this issue. It follows that human rights due diligence legislation applies only to employees in factories, then human and labor rights of workers in workshops and homes can be violated with impunity. Our third reasoning is that it is also a sector where a large proportion of women are employed in the informal employment, and especially those who work from home. There's a nice video you saw of Thailand, and I would also refer back to what Mike had presented earlier. And this is the slide. If you see, just look at, say, Bangladesh data, and it says 94% women work from home. Look at Pakistan, 90%. Cambodia, Indonesia, and India, 68%. Here, I'd also like to mention specifically about South Asia, because we've mentioned data about Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, that, women, there is basically, in South Asia, we have the lowest women's labor force participation. And women work from home due to various reasons. Suntari is mentioned about various reasons like mobility issues due to unfair burden of care work. And for many, this is the only source of remunerative work that they have. So again, if the policy makers want to contribute to sustainable development goals with the principle of leaving no one behind, then they should be concerned about making policies for this large section of women workers who are employed in the informal economy, and especially the ones from home. And last, and the fourth reason that we would like to provide to the policymakers are that if they're keen to provide a level playing field to all companies, they should ensure that all companies need to abide by the same set of rules and make policies for all workers within their supply chains. Now, some brands are quite conscious and do make codes of conduct that include all workers in the supply chains, while most brands do not. And this leads to unfair competition. Therefore, at HomeNet International, we urge policymakers to make policies that are inclusive of all workers through the supply chains, both informal as well as informal employment. Thank you, Karin. I'd pause here.
Very, very impressive, Janvi. Thank you so much. And I hope that we do have policymakers among the audience who feel inspired by your arguments and by your proposals. In particular, the competition argument. Also, brands and companies, they must be interested in avoiding unfair competition, which can only, now is achieved by just unequal working conditions. Last but not least, I'm again inviting Marlies van Breumsen, who will let us know how workers in informal employment who are working in garment and footwear supply chains are recognized in national laws and international instruments, and what more can be done. Marlies, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Karen. So just a reminder that we are dealing with 3 places of work. So there's informality in factories, in workshops, and in home. So let me deal with national law first. So factories, we're talking about fixed-term contract workers and workers who are paid by the piece. So some production countries protect fixed-term contract workers. Of course, there's an enforcement issue. I don't know of any country that protects casual workers who are paid by the piece. But there may be people in the audience who can help us there. In terms of workshops, as far as I know, India is the only country that protects workers in workshops. The India Contract Labour Regulation and Abolition Act of 1970 protects those workers who work in workshops that employ 20 workers or more. Now, if you think back to the slide that Janvi's just shown, and the point that she made about auditing driving informality, I think that slide shows, it's very interesting that the workshops that have below 10 employees have vastly more employees than the workshops that are protected. So the third category are home workers. Home workers are considered by most countries' labor laws as independent contractors and therefore not protected. As we've heard, there are home worker organizations in many countries who are fighting for legislation. You've heard from Suntari about the Thai legislation. There's also legislation in the Philippines and in the Sindh province in Pakistan. And I saw Zara Khan is here who could speak to that. So for all these groups, you know, the law is not enforced for some of the reasons that Suntari articulated so well. And in particular, with the enforcement mechanisms, if the state is not active in enforcing its own laws, it then depends on workers themselves complaining. And they won't do that because they risk losing their work, as Suntari mentioned. I think it's worth mentioning that Australia has really innovative supply chain legislation. And I'm going to ask Laura or Sabani just to upload a brief that's been written by the trade union on that supply chain legislation in our chat. And their enforcement, one of the things that's very innovative is the enforcement mechanism, where the clothing and textile union is part and parcel part of the enforcement mechanism. And that's made an enormous difference. So now moving on to international law, we have Convention 177 on homework that several speakers have referred to. And there's a very good recommendation that goes with it. In essence, the convention says that home workers should be treated like employees. But with the exception of Bulgaria, none of the production countries have ratified Convention 177. And in part, that's because low-waged employment makes a country, you know, makes that country competitive, as it were. The second piece of law, and that's obviously soft law, is the OECD due diligence guidance for the garment and footwear sector. And in particular, Module 12 is an entire module within that on homework. And I think what is really important there is how formalization is crafted within the guidance. So formalization is understood as, one, providing employment contracts. Most home workers do not have contracts. In fact, I've never seen any, and I think Janvi and Suntari would bear me out on that. Secondly, that they have equal conditions of work to other workers. Thirdly, that piece rates meet minimum wage requirements. And fourthly, that they receive social security and health insurance. And thus formalization does not mean transferring workers to go and work in factories. So just to respond to the last part of your question, Karen, which is what more can be done. So the draft text of the European Union Directive on Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence, or the text that's been politically agreed to, applies to all workers in all tiers of the chain. And here I just want to mention that 14 organizations of home workers sent letters to the EU Commission and have been advocating for that. I want to give a shout out to the Asia Floor Wage Alliance, and in particular to the Clean Clothes Campaign and the European Coalition of Corporate Justice. But I think what is a weakness in the directive as it stands at the moment, and please God, it's that's passed next week, is that the enforcement mechanism really still relies on workers coming forward to complain. And so we really do need to, when there's hopefully legislation at the national level in EU member states, that there's an emphasis on worker-driven enforcement. And by that, I mean that workers and their organizations must be consulted and must co-design these mechanisms. They understand the power relations, and particularly women, and they need to be part of how these complaints and the design, of these complaints and grievance mechanisms for them to really work. Thank you.
Very good, Marlies. To put a complex issue in a couple of minutes is just amazing. And what my takeaway from it is that the involvement of the workers themselves is crucial if protection should become real for them. And also in relation to what Marlies said, what Suntari said and what you just reiterated, is it must be a kind of collective mechanisms, because if individual workers should be complaining, of course, they fear to lose their jobs. So this is now the end of our very interesting panel. A big thank you to all of you. We have a lot of questions and we still have a lot of time. So really, I mean, big congratulations to everybody. I'm wondering, I didn't see in the participants list, Sergei from the ILO. Is he with us? That doesn't seem to be the case. Otherwise, he could have taken one of the questions on what is meant by outside home. But then, Mike, you again have to explain. I think the first two questions were for you. There is one from Shalini Kala. Does the India date include handloom weavers? That's the first question. And the second is from Sinuin Men to Mike. What do you mean by outside of homes? Does it mean home workers work in a mini factory nearby their homes or subcontracted factory? So maybe you still can shed some light on both of these questions.
Yeah, thanks for those questions. Yeah, the answer about what does outside of the home mean is a little bit unsatisfactory. I think the thing to remember is that these are large data sets that are aiming to make comparisons across countries. So they lose a little bit of the detail that we might want when they do that. But I can give one example. So for example, if we just look at one country, Bangladesh, they group the place of work in a particular way. So we know whether the work happens inside the worker's house, in the front of a house, in the employer's workplace, and then probably the thing that in the Bangladesh context is more difficult to get is, what about factories, offices, and workshops? So the labor force survey from Bangladesh combines all of those three categories into one category. So it's not possible to see the difference between factories, offices, big workshops, and small workshops in Bangladesh. But each country does this differently. So one would need to look into the data in some detail to see how, for example, in Cambodia or Pakistan or India, that information might be captured differently. But at least in Bangladesh, unfortunately, some of those categories that Marlies and Janvi pointed to in the Indian example, the labor force survey and the ILO data doesn't allow us to get more detail about outside of the home. So the one thing we can compare across the countries is the proportion that are working in their own homes. And then the other question about whether weavers using hand looms are included, that would again depend on the individual country's national statistical office and how they group them into employers. We took quite a wide approach. We looked at leather, footwear, and garments. So my initial thought would be that any type of weaving in the home would be included in garments work, but one would have to work with the specific Indian data and perhaps even the Indian National Statistical Office to figure out how they actually allocate workers and what level of detail they can go. Some countries can go very detailed into very specific activities. Other countries are not able to do that. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't think I was able to provide very detailed or interesting answers to that, apart from the probably more digging into the ILO data and the national level data would be required to answer those questions better.
Thank you very much, Mike. Since we still have a bit of time, I'm wondering if maybe Janvi and Mary and Suntari, in fact, I mean, can share a little bit about the self-understanding of home workers, or from your experience. I mean, like if I have a perception of a home worker as really a woman working in her own home, I mean, next to taking care of children, but there are different forms of kind of maybe 2-3 women gathering in a courtyard or something. So maybe you can just illustrate that in 2 or 3 sentences, because this is, I mean, a kind of self-understanding, and I would assume, I mean, how women also organize in your organizations. Who wants to go first? Janvi, maybe?
Karen, I'm happy to go, but I think Mary would like to go first. Mary, are you there? Oh, she's on mute. Okay, then I'm happy to go ahead and talk. So home workers, again, are workers who work from in and around homes. What Mike has also said that, you know, say, I come from South Asia, and so they have these small spaces. Their homes, especially in urban areas, quite cramped. In fact, you saw Marlise's photograph that was from Tirupur, where Mary is come. And so the adjoining houses, they're quite small. In the same house, they take care of the children, elderly. In a lot of places where we live, a lot of home-based workers have to fetch water, store water, they cook in the same premise, and they work in the same premise. But that doesn't mean they don't work outside. So outside could be the adjoining space, like in the courtyard, but in some of our affiliates, so HomeNet International's affiliate in Nepal, even in Argentina, they have workspaces which are owned collectively by home-based workers. So it's walking distance, so in their own locality, but it is like a shed which may be hired collectively by women where they can come together and work. And that has also happened is because individually they don't have enough bargaining power with say the contractor. So they find it easier to come together and work. It's more productive, but with increased bargaining power. So this is the sort of work that, I mean, you know, the best picture that I could provide, but Suntari is also here. I'm sure she'd like to add. And if Mary's here, she could also do that.
Thank you. Suntari or Mary, any comments, additions?
I would like to share, according to our Home Worker Protection Act in Thailand, as long as you didn't work in the factory, even you bring that piece of work to work at home, or you organize your small workshop together with your neighbor, even you use the common place like a temple yard, it's also you can call home workers as the same, as long as you don't use the factory place or factory facilities, you are home workers. That is according to our law.
Thank you, Suntari. Is Mary with us? And can she?
I think she got dropped from the call, so maybe it's the internet.
Okay, so then let's go to the next questions, which were put into the chat. There is one question from Anda Razgal. Does informal employment mostly occur in tier 1? What about other tiers? I think we already touched upon that, but maybe not in entire clarity. I don't know who wants to comment and respond to that. maybe Marlies, and maybe others who feel competent. But Marlies, maybe your first go.
Sure, happy to. So yes, it's in all tiers of the chain and it takes slightly different forms. So I don't know if you recall the first slide that I showed, which is a kind of legal definition of informality rather than statistical. So it's work that's not protected by labor law. And in factories, so that's first and second tier, as I mentioned, it would be piece-rate workers, would be workers who are fixed-term contract workers, and also workers who are employed through a brokerage. Once the next sort of levels down are in workshops, and as I mentioned, only in India are bigger workshops, are those workers seen as employees, and do they have some protection under a particular act, a contract? I forget the full name now. But in smaller workshops, there's no protection at all. And in most countries for home workers, they're seen as working for themselves and therefore not as workers, and there's no protection. So I hope that answers your question. You know, all the way down in every part of the supply chain, there are informal workers. And so there's been quite an interesting focus on, you know, a very important alliance, I think, between home worker organizations across South and Southeast Asia with the Asia Floor Wage Alliance, which is an alliance made up of trade unions across all those countries, because a shared understanding that when we think about the workforce, it's a continuum, and we shouldn't be differentiating between these workers are formal and these are not. Or even, in a sense, differentiating between the workplaces that workers work in.
I hope that was a good answer to the question. I would like to take on the next question, which was from Sinuin Men to Sunturi. It's also one of my favorite questions, I must say. The wage protection pay the same factory worker based on the hour of working or based on the day was a very specific question, but maybe you can say to illustrate also, I mean, how do you calculate at all? I mean, the equivalent from a home worker to a factory worker. Please, Sunturi.
Thank you for the question. According to our act and according to the real situation here, the owner of the factory or the employer, they pay the workers in the factory by two systems. One is by hours or by day. Second is by piece. If they pay by piece, it's easier because they will repeat that amount of wage to pay for home workers. How much per piece that the employer pay to factory worker, they will pay that rate to home workers. But if they pay the factory workers by hours, we have to ask the employer to do calculate. Like to turn from the wage of an hour to the piece rate by counting how many pieces that home worker can finish in 1 hour. If the rate of 1 hour is $10, so we will count that how many pieces worker can finish in 1 hour. If it's 10 pieces, it means that the piece rate wage is $1 per piece. I understand what I mean? Like count how many pieces that they can finish in 1 hour. And when you know that how many pieces that they can finish in 1 hour, you can find the piece rate, no? Can find the wage of piece rate. I'm not the good calculator, but I try to explain.
There is an add-on question on how the calculation is. I mean, I remember, Suntari, you once explained to me that there was even a formula where the ILO helped you to
Yes.
calculate
Yes.
that rate. And maybe
And
in order to get that really, how should I say, very specific.
ILO is one of our consultant to set the system of calculate piece rate.
Okay, Marlies also wanted to add to that. Marlies, please.
Yeah, thank you. That was an excellent explanation, actually, Suntari. What I wanted to add was in interviews with home workers in Thailand, in Bulgaria, and in different countries, what home workers report is if they begin to work more efficiently and they make more pieces within that hour, they don't earn more, they just drop the rate. So I thought that was something important to add.
Thanks, Marlies. Yeah, they become the victims of their success, as we say. Now there comes a very, very kind of difficult question from Zira. So I will read her entire question or comment. I need to understand, she says, how we can ask the brands for the transparency in their supplier list. Secondly, we have the Pakistan Accord, and because of our efforts, the home-based workers were also discussed and considered to be included in the training level, but the issue is finding the link. This is the biggest issue, to find them. So it's about the transparency and how you can actually catch them. So maybe I give this first to Marlies, and then everybody who wants to kind of join in with maybe some other examples.
So I want to suggest, so there's the transparency pledge, where brands, pledge to be more transparent, but I think there are very few that go beyond the first tier. But I know that there are people from the Clean Clothes campaign on this call. So I don't know, Muriel or others, whether they could speak to this issue. I know certainly in more detail than I could. So there's in the chat, there's something from Muriel in the chat on the transparency pledge.
I see. I can also see that Muriel is on the call. Maybe Muriel, you want to share some insights quickly?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you for organizing the session. And yeah, it's been very interesting to hear from the partners and the colleagues from WIEGO and HomeNet International. So I work for Clean Clothes Campaign. Just about that question about the transparency, as Marlies flagged, we and other organizations and trade unions had been pushing garment brands to be more transparent in their supply chain, starting with tier 1. And so that's what the transparency pledge had been about. But what's been interesting over the last years has been to see how some brands, also pressured by civil society, have started to look increasingly at their, further down the supply chain, so including tier 2 and tier 3. So I also want to flag the existence of this website called Open Supply Hub, where you can actually check the supplier list of those of many brands. I'm putting that in the chat. But definitely, I think the question of transparency and information about the home-based workers is still quite a challenge. Part of it because it's a bit more difficult to have that information, but also because so far brands are not investing the right resources and efforts into knowing that part of that supply chain. They're quite happy, kind of like being ignorant about that. So I don't have an easy solution about how to do that, but I think that definitely keep the pressure towards the brands and the industry on flagging the importance of home-based workers in the garment supply chain, and really requiring of companies to take that into account will hopefully lead to a bit more information and transparency over that side of the industry.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you also for sharing the links in the chat. Marlies is adding that the Australian legislation is worth reading in this regard. So I remember when we were preparing for this European process, one of the key demands of the home workers was actually to know for whom they work. And and maybe the Australian legislation, if we go into that, can explain to us a little bit more how it can be done. So thank you about that. There was another proposal from Zira, and that was on the chapter 12 of the OECD guidelines, which actually refers to the protecting the rights of home workers. And she is suggesting, if I get that right, how to make them implementable. Maybe Zira, you just, because I'm quoting here you all the time, maybe you want to say something in this regard. Are you still with us? Zira, are you there? Okay, otherwise we would just note that as a good proposal to maybe have a separate session on this. And maybe HomeNet International can think about maybe offering a session about that. There was another question from Punsap from Thailand on the progress of C177, the famous ILO Homework Convention, in protecting the rights of home workers. If we look at the list of the ratifications, as far as I remember, I don't think there is a lot of progress, but maybe some of the participants have something which they can share on processes. And I see that Janvi has some inside knowledge. She wants to share this with us.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Karin, and thank you, Punsap, for that question. So not so much of an inside knowledge, but we all know that there are only 13 countries who have ratified, right? Last being Spain. And the countries that we have, I can just quickly go through them. One is Albania, Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Belgium, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Finland, Ireland, Netherlands, North Macedonia, Slovenia, Spain, and Tajikistan. Now, it's quite sad. A lot of countries that we would want, we gave examples of Bangladesh and Pakistan and Thailand and India and Cambodia, Indonesia, none of them have ratified, right? So Punsap also comes from Asia. So we definitely are lagging behind in terms of ratification. But we also know the challenge why there is low ratification, because our countries generally don't believe in ratification of these ILO conventions. They feel it's by ratification, they'll be embarrassed in international spaces, is what we hear from a lot of policymakers back at our home. But what we do have now is, because we have HomeNet International, the first campaign that we've launched is for ratification of Convention 177. It is an uphill task, but in this campaign, 4 countries have taken up the responsibility and going for ratification. So in the next 4 years, they will push for ratification within their own countries. There are also other countries who have mentioned that they will push for improvisation in the existing policies. So say, for example, we have an affiliate in Argentina, and they've ratified, they're on the list, but their home workers are really not included. So they are talking about how to improve the existing policies that they have. So they all have different strategies, because countries work very differently with their governments. But that is one of the first HomeNet International's campaign, and any support from other organizations, sister organizations, will be very, very helpful, because it's been many years of Convention 177, and you see the low ratification, and we definitely have to work with other trade unions, even, campaign organization, Clean Clothes Campaign was here. And a lot of that support will be required for getting any of these ratifications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jambi. I mean, if I may, to exploit my position, I mean, just to add that 2 years ago, we were part of the ILO general discussion on the social and solidarity economy. And there was a list of recommended ILO instruments that may be important for the topic to promote more cooperatives and other solidarity economy organizations. And the employers were, as always, very much against to include C177. Indeed, the whole kind of discussion almost failed because the workers were insisting, the workers group in that committee were insisting on having C177, and they finally managed. So for me, this was a kind of signal of revitalization of having C177 on the agenda. And there were most of the governments or the governments that were speaking were very, very much in favor. So I think we have to consider a little bit of creative ways, maybe, on kind of using these kind of ILO instruments, or even outcome of general discussions, and kind of go to the governments and say, no, this is what you said 2 years ago, so now take action, and to kind of combine the efforts, as Janvi said, on these on these kind of arguments and advocacy strategies. There was still another question, and since we still have a lot of time, isn't that fantastic? Sinuin was asking again a very specific question, and maybe also one of our knowledgeable people of the panelists can answer to that. Many home workers receive the work from middlemen, not directly from the factory. So what do you think? How to calculate actually the wage? And I think this still refers to the Thai kind of Protection Act. So maybe another inside view on how to tackle this difficult question. Suntari, you want to?
Yeah, the wage that we talking about is the wage that home worker get it. No? I mean, at the bottom of the line, home worker must get the same wage of the factory workers, and it's very idea that the role of the the idea of this act, no? Of our act, the role of the contractor have to pay by the owner of the factory separately from the wage of the workers. And if they don't want to pay, one thing that we suggest is you deal direct with home workers, cut off the subcontractor. That is. But that is the idea, no? But in practical, it's not like that, because the factory owner always say that, oh, I already pay the fair wage, the fair piece rate to the subcontractor already. That after that or below that is not our duty anymore. That is the facts. That is the situation that happened. A little bit different from the idea of the law.
Who was
sorry, Karen, I wasn't able to raise my hand for some odd reason. If I may add to this, will that be okay?
Please do.
Right. I am actually missing Mary because, she, of course, can talk a lot more about this, but I have been there. Their affiliate organization, Anukatam from Tirupur. And, this entire notion about middlemen and these subcontractors, they're not always the big villains that that are projected to be, because in many cases, and in Tirupur especially, they've shown us that, you know, the person who we get the work from, so the subcontractor lives next door, you know, lives in the same locality. That person's one of them, you know, the husband or somebody, the father or someone, the son. So, you know, they know each other very well. And in fact, when we talked about, you know, but you get low wages, so isn't it the subcontractor who pays you less? And they said, no, actually the subcontractor is also getting paid very low by the factories themselves. So there is, in fact, so in some locations, definitely it's the case that the middlemen are squeezing a lot and providing low wages, low piece rates to home workers, but it's not always the case. And the second is, how do they calculate is, I think Sister Primar was there. She talked about time motion studies. Some do it in a very structured way. And some of them we've seen is they would, if they have a piece to make, they would ask one of the home workers amongst, you know, the locality who has an average speed to make that. So they make a piece and they look at the time and they calculate as per the minimum wages and then they provide. But like some people have mentioned, that minimum wage itself is not enough. And therefore now there's a big push towards fair wages, living wages, and not minimum wage.
Thank you very much, Janvi. There is a lot of Spanish now going on in the chat. Maybe there was a translation which kind of disappeared, I think. Maybe some of the interpreters could please put that forward. Thank you. Just to say, officially, telework is not included in C177. So, but if it is in the Chilean law, of course, then they applied it differently. Yeah, any more kind of questions or comments? I haven't seen anything more in the chat, unless I missed something. Maybe Laura can help me on that. Because otherwise, I would suggest for the last 6 minutes, we can really open up and let people speak. Laura, anything I missed?
No, I think you've covered it all for the moment.
Okay. So there are coming in more messages. Thank you from Sinuan. That's fine. So we still have 6 minutes. Anybody who still wants to ask questions or just comment, maybe has some suggestions for kind of follow up, what we can do all together. I cannot see hands coming up.
Tatiana has her hand raised.
Tatiana, okay. Tatiana, then please go ahead.
Sí, hola, buenos días a todas y todos y todes. Yo en realidad lo que me refería en Chile es que efectivamente se está leyendo mal el convenio 177 y que nosotros tenemos que tener cuidado con eso, porque en realidad todos lo están leyendo desde la formalidad. Cualquier persona que tiene trabajo, o la mayoría de las personas que tienen teletrabajo, tienen un contrato firmado. Entonces, la labor de nuestra es empezar a explicarle a los gobiernos que justamente lo que queremos no es seguir invisibilizados, sino que no se nos confunda y que el trabajo informal todavía está ahí y que el convenio 177 se refiere al trabajo informal justamente. Esa es una de las una de las cuestiones importantes que tenemos que agregar a nuestro trabajo. ¿Ah? Empezar a informar que efectivamente no es el teletrabajo el que rige el convenio 177.
Thank you, Tatiana. That's absolutely right. Because telework is just a kind of remote place of work for workers in an employment relationship. I mean, that's, as far as I know, more or less the official version of the ILO, but I think Marlies could kind of put that into right language. Marlies doesn't want to comment on it?
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute. So maybe just to say, Tatiana, that I'm sure you're correct, but I wonder to what extent it might be strategic to be aligning with, if it includes a larger set of workers. And I use this example from I was about to say Ukraine, oh, help me. I'm going to get the country in a minute. Sorry, Uruguay, where the Clothing and Textile Workers Union organizes home workers. And WIEGO with them had meetings, firstly with the trade union, the broader trade union movement, and with the Deputy Minister of Labor. And they were not interested to ratify Convention 177 if it only applies to industrial art workers, because it's too small a grouping of workers. But the moment they think that it applies to a bigger group of workers, but also there's something sexy about telework, where industrial art workers or home workers, as we know them, are much less visible. There was an interest from the government to do that. And in Belgium, that's why, as my understanding, we went to a side event at the ILO. That's why they ratified the convention. So, you know, home worker organizations would have to decide, obviously, themselves at a national level, whether that might be strategic to make the case that it applies to both groups of workers, and that one's then able to perhaps build a larger group of stakeholders to be in solidarity with that. And I think that's a political question. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you so much, Marlies. Just also to mention that as of next year, there will be a 2-year standard setting process in the ILO on platform workers. It's about these Uber workers and other transport workers, but it's also about home-based work through platforms. That's one. The other one, because we are now really running out of time, please look at the comment from our colleagues from the ICA, from the International Cooperative Alliances. They want to support us on the helping to do something about the ratification of C177. So thank you so much for this. There was one thing I forgot, because there is a request to share the presentations from Nazir Uddin. I think we can provide that for everybody. I haven't clarified beforehand, but I don't see a problem really. And for 30 seconds, I just really like to thank all the panelists, all the active kind of participations, every participant, of course. I think that was a quite lively and interesting session. I also want to thank, of course, all the people that were working behind the scenes, the communication people, and of course the interpreters. We never see them, but we know without them we wouldn't be able to do this session. So thank you all very much, and hope to see you soon again in other forums and sessions which deal with informal work in supply chains and protecting the workers of all tiers of the chain. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.